man, or does not the law say the same also? You see, Paul saying, it's not me telling you this. It is the Word of God established by the Lord Himself that declares this. For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does He say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes, wait, you went too fast. I apologize. He who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we have sown spiritual things for you, and stay here, Josh, don't get off this. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? Boy, right now, in most churches, people be bristling. Because you see, it's not the way it's received in most places. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? If others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? Nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the altar? Even so the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. There is within the mainline Protestant churches, and I fear some of the Pentecostal churches, an attitude that the preacher is usually less than others in the congregation, not very smart, not capable. And some think that the only reason he's a preacher is because he can't do anything else. I've heard that said before. Anybody here heard that said before? I remember the first church we ever attended, our pastor walked as if he was oblivious to life around him. He just walked along like this. You remember the cartoons, the guys walking down the street and pianos are falling behind them, you know, and all sorts of calamities are happening and nothing ever happens. This guy conducted his life within the church that way. So we could be having a holy terror of a war and people taking blood from each other in huge chunks and him just walking along, whistling while he works. And I've come to believe that many churches like their pastors like that. What he's good for is to give them a sermonette, judge the pickles at the county fair, and be the object of ridicule with his clothing and his speech. How many know Ennis Hyman? Anybody here know Ennis Hyman? I know people go to his church. I can't believe the things that they have said about him when he was a pastor up there. And I know Brother Hennis. I got great respect for Brother Hennis. I think he's a pretty smart man. But people talk about him with ridicule and with condescension, as if the man of God is not much more than their pet dog. You do?
No, I don't.
And therefore the churches are in total, they're in total disarray. See, you I'm sure are like me. I've often wondered, why is the one place on earth that's supposed to be special generally the most messed up? I mean, wouldn't you agree with me on that? Most of the churches you've ever been to, they are a conglomeration of unbelievable silliness. And people get hurt, and all sorts of foolishness goes on. Why, more of that happens than anything good. People actually get afraid to go to church. People are afraid to speak when they're in the church because whatever they say might be used against them. Most people, when they go to church, it's like being in a court of law. They need to be read their Miranda rights. Whatever you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Well, that's going to be a court of law, my brother. And there is no appeal. But that's what Paul is talking about. He says, don't you people understand? We have invested ourselves in you. We have poured our lives into you. You exist because we gave you everything we have, and yet you respond to us as if we have no value in your eyes whatsoever. Now, I'm planning on being here a long time unless God decides to take me on to heaven. But I want you to hear this, and the young people need to be taught this so that whenever another preacher comes in here, he is treated like he's supposed to be treated and given a place like he's supposed to be given a place. I have a friend, I will not mention his name because some of you would know him, who attends one of those churches here in this town. Now, he attended another church in this town, but he got mad and left because the preacher that they wanted to call to the church asked for a salary. He wasn't willing to take whatever offering came in that Sunday. He wanted a salary. Well, my friend got angry and he said these famous words. Is he here to serve God or does he just want filthy lucre? And I thought I said to him, I said, when you go to work each day, do you go for just whatever they're going to give you? Or do you know what you're going to earn before you get there? Well, I know what I'm going to make. I said, then all you're interested in is filthy lucre. How can you not hold yourself to the same standard you want to hold him? Why is he supposed to sacrifice when you're unwilling to sacrifice? The man looked at me. He still does not understand what I'm talking about. He still does not comprehend today because the preacher's wife ought to be able to do with secondhand dresses. The preacher ought to be able to do with a secondhand car that ain't all one color, just don't have matching tires. The preacher ought to be able to live in that mobile home that ain't got a top. In other words, the preacher ought to be able to wear what they wouldn't wear, ought to be able to drive what they wouldn't drive, and ought to be able to live in what they wouldn't live in. Because after all, he's just the preacher.
And then teach them everything they want to hear.
Yeah, tell me what I want to hear. And he's not the pastor because, by golly, ain't nobody got nothing on me.
Sounds like a bunch of spoiled kids.
Yeah. Now, how did this come about? It came about because the churches will accept anybody to be their pastor. Huh? Listen, the last year I was in the Assemblies of God, they sent out a thing saying how many more preachers we needed. Why did we need more preachers? Did God say we needed more preachers? Churches are half empty now. What do we need another preacher for? God determines how many preachers we're supposed to have. And He determines who is a preacher. That's nobody's business but God's. But yet we'll pick anybody. You go around to these churches and I got people in the pulpit. Good Lord, help us, Jesus. I'm not the best in the world, but I know I'm committed to the Word and to the prayer and to the sanctity of the truth of Jesus Christ. And I swear these people will preach anything they hear on a cassette tape. When I was in North Carolina in the Assemblies of God, they came out with a thing that said we needed 220 new preachers that year. We had 600 that had no church. We had 600 men and women in the state who had Assemblies of God credentials that had no church. Now, why did we need another 200? And then all of a sudden we needed preachers that was under 40. God needs to raise up preachers under 40. That became the new criteria. And what happens is these men go into these churches, primarily men, sometimes ladies, primarily men. They go into these churches. They're not at all prepared to be the pastor because in order to be the pastor, you have to be willing to sacrifice yourself for the truth of Jesus Christ. And that means if you make people angry, you make them angry. You don't set out to make them angry, but you don't sell your soul in order to be popular in God's house. But how many men do you know who were unwilling to stand for the truth because they were afraid they were going to lose their job or their income or whatever? Anybody here can testify to that? Sure you can. So when you start bringing people in who are not anointed and God has not called, what else can happen? What else can happen? So that's, the church has, listen, when the day comes that I leave, and you all are probably at this point saying, I hope it's tonight, but when that day comes, Lord, don't just take the first guy that walks in. Make sure it is a water-walking, tongue-talking, fire-breathing, devil-whipping, wild-eyed, crazy man that ain't interested in the world. Doesn't have career aspirations. Doesn't want another church. Doesn't want political achievement. Not looking to be part of any club around here. A wild man. In other words, you don't need a man that's interested in putting sheepskin on the wall. You need a man that wants to put camel hair on his back.
I don't think Dr. Larry come over here.
Well, you never know. He's not the only one. Well, they're out there. But, I mean, what I'm saying is that and when you find such a one, then God will bring order into God's house. Let's go ahead and get a little deeper into this because I want to show you biblically so you won't think I'm just doing this to butter my own bread. I got my bishop credentials 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to have to say, I don't try to put that down. I'm encouraged that the people in the Church of God would entrust me with such a thing. It's the highest level of credentials that you can get in the Church of God. You know what it says on that thing? The admonition that Paul gave Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. This is a faithful saying. If a man desires, it's up there, Josh, it should be the next one. If a man desires, this is a faithful saying, if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. Now look, you giggle because the mainstream church ridicules titles. I'm not putting you down. You've been conditioned. You've been conditioned that you shouldn't regard and honor that. It's a heavy Church of Christ influence in this community that the only thing they'll address you by is brother. That's a Church of Christ thing because they will not recognize the word preacher, pastor, or certainly bishop. Lord, they'd probably want me shot at dawn. Yet it's biblical. If a man desires the position of a brother, that ain't what it says. If a man desires the position of a bishop, now the definition of a bishop is one who has authority in the work. He desires a good work, and I do desire it. I want to. See, I don't have a problem with holy ambition. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be better than what you are and to be able to do more than you've done and to be more faithful than you've been and to love God more than you've loved and to know the Word more than you've known. There's nothing wrong with that. Why, any pastor that doesn't believe that way ought to quit right now. Any pastor is satisfied with where he is, don't have the right to stand in front of those precious people. About once a week I whip myself. And people say you shouldn't do that. I say you should. Because I have a great cross to bear. My cross covers all you. And it has to be that way. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, there's my problem, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. Now, how many of you know that the worst kids in the world are preachers' kids?
Yes.
Well, why ain't the preacher doing something about it? The Bible tells you what to do. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him. We lived, when I was a teenager, we lived next to one of those preachers. He pastored a big old church there in our town. His kid, I wanted to shoot him. That was the meanest little boy I have ever seen in my life. You know, he disciplined him with a dog whistle. That kid couldn't hear that dog whistle. I'm serious. The guy would walk out the door, the kids, who knows where, the guy would walk out the door and go, well, you never saw the kid, you'd see 8,000 dogs already go, rum, yum, yum, yum. That kid could tell his father what to do with himself, and his dad just stand there and say, well, boys will be boys. Well, then he needed to step in the pulpit and say, my little 6-year-old is more of a man than I am, so I'm going to quit. But have him, you know, it's a problem. It's a serious problem. But what does the Word say? What did the Word say?